What if a machine knew you better than you knew yourself? Not your playlists, not your watch history, but you. The version of you that stays up at 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling, quietly terrified that maybe, just maybe, you are the problem. What would you do if an algorithm looked into every corner of who you are and handed you a name? Would you trust it? Imani Osei had been building the future for 3 years, and she had the under-eye circles to prove it. 29 years old, a data scientist with a master's from Johns Hopkins, and a personality that her mother described as intimidating baby, but in a way that makes people want to impress you. She lived alone in a clean, sparse apartment in Atlanta. Plants she remembered to water, a coffee maker she'd named Gerald, and a whiteboard that covered an entire wall and was covered in equations that would make most people's heads hurt just to look at. The whiteboard was her real relationship. ARIA, Adaptive Relational Intelligence Architecture, was her creation, a dating app unlike anything the market had seen. Not swipe-based, not preference-filtered, ARIA worked by pulling anonymized behavioral data, linguistic pattern analysis, emotional response modeling, and deep psychographic profiling to generate what Imani had publicly called a 100% compatibility match. Not high compatibility, not strong potential, 100%. She had staked her name on that number. The thing about building something with total confidence is, at some point, the world asks you to prove it. The moment came at 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, in the middle of a product pitch to Tech Bridge Ventures, 4 investors in a glass conference room, all of them with that specific kind of careful blankness that rich people deploy when they're deciding whether to believe you. Imani stood at the head of the table. Her slides were clean, her data was airtight, and she had been talking for 11 minutes without a single stumble. Then Marcus Webb, the senior partner, silver-haired, perpetually skeptical, leaned back in his chair and said, "So you're telling me this thing is 100% accurate?" "That's correct. You've tested it extensively, 12,000 simulated pairing scenarios, 94 real-world beta trials. The algorithm has a 0% incompatibility rate when... Have you used it?" The room went still. Imani's jaw tightened just slightly, the kind of micro-expression that only a behavioral analyst would catch, or a data scientist who'd spent 3 years building one. "I designed it. I don't need to." "Because here's what I'm hearing," Marcus said, leaning forward now, lacing his fingers together. "You've built a product that promises to find the perfect partner for anyone, but the person who built it hasn't let it find hers." He tilted his head. "Why not?" She smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "That's a fair challenge," she said. Subscribe now. If you're already invested in Imani, you're going to want to see where this goes. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. I told myself it was just to satisfy the investors. One match, one date. I'd document it, show the system worked, and that would be that. Clean, professional, controlled. She entered her own data. It took ARIA 4 minutes and 37 seconds to return a result. Imani had run the algorithm hundreds of times. She knew that a longer processing window meant the system was working harder, cross-referencing more variables, running additional validation loops. The longer it took, the more confident the output. 4 minutes and 37 seconds was the longest it had ever taken. A name appeared on screen. Match. Woo-jin Cha. Compatibility score, 100%. She pulled up his profile. Park Woo-jin, 31, Seoul-born, Atlanta-based, independent AI developer. No social media presence beyond a GitHub account with 847 commits last month alone. His profile photo looked like it had been taken by someone else against his will. He was half turned away from the camera, glasses slightly askew, wearing an expression that very clearly said, "I would like to be anywhere that is not here." His self-description field contained one sentence. I prefer systems to people because systems behave according to their design. Imani read it twice. Then she closed her laptop, looked at Gerald, the coffee maker, and said, "This is going to be a disaster." Gerald said nothing. He never did. She appreciated that about him. If Imani's apartment was sparse by choice, Woo-jin's was sparse by consequence, the consequence of someone who genuinely never noticed that normal people put things on walls. His place looked like a server room that had grudgingly agreed to also contain a bed. Monitors everywhere, cables managed with a precision that bordered on obsessive. A single succulent on the windowsill, the only living thing besides him, and he'd named it Null because it required no emotional investment. He was mid-keystroke when his phone buzzed, a notification from an app he barely remembered downloading, something a colleague had installed on his phone during a team lunch 6 months ago as a joke. He'd left it there because deleting things required navigating menus, and menus required clicking through prompts, and prompts were, in Woo-jin's precise internal taxonomy, inefficient uses of time. ARIA, a 100% match has been found for you. He looked at the notification for a long moment. Then he looked at Null. Then he looked back at the notification. I want to be very clear that what happened next was entirely the fault of the number 100. Any other number, 99, 98, I would have ignored it. But 100 is a provocation. 100 is a system claiming perfection. And a system claiming perfection, Woo-jin thought, sitting up a little straighter, deserves to be stress-tested. He accepted the match. Imani arrived 4 minutes early because she always arrived 4 minutes early. She wore a rust-orange wrap dress and had her natural hair out, loose and full, and she sat with a posture of someone who had prepared for every possible version of this conversation. She had, in fact, prepared for every possible version of this conversation. What she had not prepared for was Woo-jin walking in 12 minutes late wearing a gray hoodie, dark jeans, and an expression that suggested he had lost an argument with himself about whether to come at all. He spotted her immediately, the coffee shop wasn't that big, and crossed toward her with the particular gait of someone navigating a space they consider mildly hostile. He sat down. He did not say hello. What he said was, "Your algorithm has a fundamental flaw." Nice to meet you too? I'm serious. He pulled his phone out and set it on the table, ARIA's interface open. It weights emotional compatibility at 32% of the total score, but emotional compatibility is the most volatile variable in long-term relational success. Weighting it that high in the initial match creates a selection bias toward, "I know how my own algorithm works." Then you know it's flawed. It has a 100% compatibility score between us, and you've been sitting here for, she checked her watch, 40 seconds. Compatibility scores measure potential, not reality. Reality is, he gestured vaguely between them, this. It was the worst first date I'd ever been on, and I once went on a date with a man who spent 40 minutes explaining why the moon landing was a soundstage. This was worse. The next 90 minutes were a masterclass in two highly intelligent people being spectacularly, almost impressively, bad at being in the same room. Imani found Woo-jin's bluntness abrasive. He found her polish performative. She thought he was arrogant. He thought she was defensive. She ordered a latte. He ordered black coffee and said, "Milk in coffee is a texture decision, not a taste one." And she actually had to look out the window for a moment to collect herself. When they finally left, separately, without making plans to meet again, Imani sat in her car in the parking deck for 6 full minutes. Then she called her best friend, Zara. "He's insufferable," she said, the moment Zara picked up. "Oh no, you like him." "Zara, you only use that specific tone of voice for things that bother you more than they should. He said my algorithm is flawed, to my face, within a minute of sitting down." "Is it?" Imani ended the call. She sat there a moment longer, alone in the amber dark of the parking deck, her reflection ghosted in the windshield. Something sat in her chest that she didn't want to name.
She was going to break it. Not destroy ARIA, she wasn't irrational, but if there was a flaw in the logic matching, she was going to find it, document it, and present a corrected model to TechBridge before the follow-up meeting in 2 weeks. She'd tell the investors she'd used the app, the match was algorithmically sound, and the data had already been refined. Perfectly controlled narrative.
The problem was that the more she dug into the compatibility report ARIA had generated for her and Woo-jin, the more she couldn't find the error. She stayed up until 2 a.m., then 3. ARIA had flagged 37 specific compatibility markers between us: communication style, complementary, not matching; value alignment, nearly identical; cognitive approach, opposing, which the model weights as generative friction, meaning we'd push each other in ways that drive growth. Even our stress responses were mapped as complementary. His tendency to withdraw paired with my tendency to overfunction. The model called it a stabilizing dynamic. She set the marker down. "The algorithm wasn't wrong," she said quietly, to no one. She picked her phone up, opened ARIA, stared at his name. Then, against every instinct she had, she typed, "I want to run a formal compatibility stress test. Meet me Saturday. Bring your critique of the algorithm." 3 minutes passed. Then, define formal. She almost smiled. Almost. They worked. Not talked, worked. 2 people pulling at a system from opposite angles, and something strange happened inside that opposition. They were actually genuinely good at it together. Imani saw patterns. Woo-jin saw exceptions. She built frameworks. He broke them, and in the breaking, made them stronger. When she explained a variable weighting decision, he didn't dismiss it. He interrogated it, and the interrogation made her see it more clearly than she had when she'd built it. At some point, without either of them acknowledging it, they had moved from opposite ends of the bench to sitting beside each other, both leaning toward the screen. At some other point, it was dark. He laughed once at something I said about a variable I'd named conflict quotient. He said it sounded like something a villain would name a weapon, and it was the least filtered thing he'd said all day, and it was actually funny. I didn't let him see that I thought so, but. When they finally packed up, standing at the park exit where the streets split into 2 different directions, there was a pause. One of those pauses that happens in the gap between what people say and what they actually mean. "This was useful," Woo-jin said. It was the most human thing he said to her. "Yeah," Imani said. "It was." It was from Marcus Webb. The subject line read, "Update on TechBridge Consideration, ARIA Evaluation." She opened it before she'd finished her first cup of coffee, which was a mistake, because what she read made the coffee feel like it had turned to gravel in her stomach. TechBridge had commissioned an independent technical review of ARIA. Standard due diligence, Marcus wrote. The team review had raised concerns about one specific element of the algorithm, the proprietary behavioral modeling layer that formed the core of what made ARIA different from every other matching system on the market. The concern, the base model, the emotional recognition framework she'd quietly licensed 18 months ago from a small independent developer's open-source project and then built upon, substantially, genuinely built upon, and had always meant to properly attribute and hadn't, not clearly, not in the pitch deck. She pulled up the GitHub link she'd bookmarked a year and a half ago. The repository belonged to a developer named Woo-jin A Dev. She called him. He picked up on the second ring, which she would not have expected. "I need to ask you something," she said. Her voice was even, professionally even, the kind of even that requires effort. "Okay?" "Your emotional pattern recognition model, the one you published on GitHub in 2022, the EPRA framework?" Silence. Then, "What about it?" "I used it as a base layer for ARIA's behavioral modeling." More silence. A different kind. I built on it significantly, she continued. I modified the weighting architecture, added the psychographic profiling layer, rewrote about 60% of the implementation, but the foundational framework is yours. And I didn't credit it properly in the pitch. I thought I could. She stopped, swallowed. I thought I could separate my contribution from yours enough that it wouldn't be an issue. I was wrong. How long have you known? He asked. I knew which project it was derived from. I didn't know it was yours specifically until what? Until this morning. Another silence. This one was the longest. When he spoke again, his voice was flat in a way that was worse than anger. So, the app matched us, he said slowly, and the app was built on my work that you didn't tell me you were using. Woo-jin. ARIA didn't just match us. ARIA matched you to the person whose work you were standing on and didn't tell anyone about. It's more complicated than, is it? It wasn't a question. The line stayed open for 4 more seconds. She could hear him breathing. Then the call ended. I had built a machine to find honesty in human connection, and I had not been honest. He was not angry. He'd checked, carefully, the way he checked everything, run an internal diagnostic. What he found underneath the flatness was something he was considerably less equipped to handle than anger. He felt seen. Specifically, he felt like something he'd built quietly, alone, and put into the world without fanfare had mattered enough for someone to take it, to use it, to build something extraordinary on top of it, and that someone had not said anything, which hurt, and that the person who had not said anything was Imani, which hurt in a completely different way that he was not prepared to categorize. He pulled up ARIA on his phone. He looked at the compatibility report, all 37 markers. He'd gone through them himself 2 nights ago, after the park, in the privacy of his apartment, methodically, the way he did everything, and had found himself unable to argue with a single one. Complementary communication styles, opposing but generative cognitive approaches, matching core values. And here was a 38th marker that the algorithm hadn't listed but probably should have. They were both people who trusted systems more than they trusted themselves, who built walls and called them architecture, who were more comfortable expressing who they were through their work than through their words.
She had put herself into ARIA. He had put himself into EPRA. And somehow, in the circuitry between them, those two selves had found each other before the humans ever had. He sat down on the floor with his back against the wall, not dramatic, just the closest flat surface, and stared at the ceiling for a very long time. Then he texted her. "You should have told me." 3 seconds passed. "I know. 3 more. Why didn't you?" The typing indicator appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Disappeared for a full minute. Then, because if you knew, you'd have a reason to dismiss it. The app, the match, all of it. And I didn't want you to. Now inside the TechBridge building, made of glass and steel and the particular ambient hum of places where important decisions are made. Imani had made a decision the night before that she was now walking through the lobby to execute, which meant she had approximately 23 floors of elevator ride to change her mind, and she was choosing not to. She'd called Marcus Webb at 7 a.m. and asked for an emergency slot before the formal review meeting. He'd given her 15 minutes, which was either generous or a courtesy before an execution, and she'd walked in prepared to find out which. The conference room was the same glass box. The same 4 investors, except this time they were in morning light, harder, less forgiving than the artificial fluorescence of her last pitch. "I need to correct something," she said, before she sat down. "In my pitch, I represented ARIA's behavioral modeling layer as fully original, developed in-house. That was incomplete. The foundational emotional pattern recognition framework was derived from an open-source project developed by an independent AI developer named Woo-jin. I built substantially on that framework, the architecture, the psychographic integration, the compatibility weighting, but the base belongs to him, and I should have said so from the start. She sat down. The room was quiet. That's a significant disclosure, Marcus said. It is. What changed? Why are you telling us now? Imani looked at the table for a moment. Then back up. Because I built a product to help people be honest about who they are and what they want from other people. And I wasn't being either. She paused. I'd like the chance to bring Woo-jin in as a co-developer. If he's willing. The product is better with both of us on it. I think the review team's findings actually prove that. Marcus Webb looks at her for a long moment. Something behind his careful blankness shifts almost imperceptibly. I didn't know if he'd say yes. I hadn't asked him yet. I was operating on faith in a system I'd built and a person I was still learning, which, I was beginning to understand, was the whole point. A different coffee shop. Smaller, quieter. The kind of place that doesn't take itself seriously at all. Slightly worn chairs, good light, the smell of something baking. It's the following Saturday. Woo-jin was already there when Imani arrived. On time, which meant he'd arrived early, which she noted but didn't say anything about. She sat down across from him. He had his hands wrapped around a black coffee. His glasses were slightly askew again. She had come to understand that the slightly askew glasses were not carelessness. They were just the shape of his face at rest, which was a shape that did not particularly care what it looked like, which she had originally found off-putting and now found something else entirely. I spoke to TechBridge, she said.
I know. Marcus Webb emailed me. He looked at her steadily. You told them about EPRA before you knew if I'd be willing to co-develop. Yes. That was a significant professional risk. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Why? She held his gaze. Because the right thing and the strategic thing aren't always the same thing, and I spent 18 months choosing strategy. I was tired of it. Something in his expression, that careful, guarded stillness, moves, just slightly, like a door not opening but unlocking. I've been thinking about the 37 markers, he said, after a moment. Me too. The algorithm isn't wrong. I know. I find you... He stopped. Started again. I find people, in general, very... There's a lot of noise, and I don't do well with noise. But you're... Another stop. His hands tightened slightly around the cup. You're not noise, even when you're wrong, which you were, about the attribution. I know I was. I'm saying it wasn't just a professional failure. It bothered me specifically because it was you, which is data. Imani looked at him. Did you just use the word data to describe your feelings? I'm working with available vocabulary. She laughed. A real one, not polished, not managed. It came out fuller than she intended, and she saw the corner of his mouth do something quiet and private, the kind of thing that would have been invisible if she hadn't been watching closely. Woo-jin? Yes. Do you want to build this with me? He looked at her for a long moment. The light in the coffee shop was golden and unhurried. Somewhere behind them, something warm came out of the oven. The app, or... Start with the app. Yes, he said. Here's what I know now that I didn't know when I started. I built ARIA because I believed in patterns. I believed that if you gathered enough information about a person, enough honest, unguarded, unperformed information, you could find the shape of them. And if you could find the shape of them, you could find the shape of someone made fit. What I didn't account for is that sometimes the fit isn't comfortable. Sometimes the shape that completes yours is the one that presses against all your edges, that finds the places you've rounded off and says, no, that part was real, don't sand it down. Woo-jin never told me I was impressive. He never said my work was groundbreaking or my vision was inspiring. What he said, 3 months in, standing in my apartment in front of the whiteboard covered in our combined work, was, you see things I don't. That's not a small thing. And I understood in that moment what the algorithm had known before either of us did. Not that we were perfect, not that it would be easy, but that we were real to each other in the specific way that matters, the way where someone sees you fully, flaws annotated and included, and doesn't correct for them, doesn't need you to be a cleaner version,
just the version that exists. ARIA went live 4 months after TechBridge funded the revised pitch. Woo-jin's name is on the product alongside mine. His EPRA framework, properly credited, became the thing every tech publication talked about, the architectural heart of the most accurate compatibility engine ever built. At the launch event, a reporter asked me if it was strange to have the app match me to my co-founder. I said, the app matches people to who they need. I just wasn't expecting to need someone who'd call me out on my nonsense on the first date. Somewhere to my left, Woo-jin said, it was technically the first 40 seconds. And I thought, yeah, the algorithm was right. It usually is, about the things that matter, about the people who'll change you. We just have to be brave enough to believe it.